I'm Roy with JamStone Magic, and today I want to take you on an adventure. Do you like adventure stories?
Yes.
How many of you like to read?
I like to.
You like to read? I love stories, and I loved when I was a kid going to the library and reading adventure books. I used to love to read them because I would get to go on the adventure that was being told in that story. And sometimes they were space adventures with astronauts and stuff. Sometimes they were cowboy adventures. But my favorite adventure of all was pirate adventures. So today we're going to go on a pirate adventure. I'll tell you about a fellow by the name of Pirate Pete who had plundered a precious pirate booty. And he had a whole chest of pirate treasure. And he decided that he was going to take that pirate treasure. He was going to get on his ship. He and his fellow pirates and his parrot were going to go and find a desert island that they could hide and bury that treasure on. Okay? Now, Pirate Pete and his trusty macaw Marty and all the other pirates that were on his ship with him, they were sailing along. And all of a sudden, the calm water on the sea got really rough. And you know what happened? A kraken came. You know what a kraken is? It's a great, big, giant octopus! And the big, giant kraken, it reached its tentacles up and it grabbed hold of that ship and it began to crush that ship into little, bitty, tiny pieces. And Pirate Pete and all of his pirate friends were facing a certain death. And all that Pirate Pete could think about was his treasure. So he grabbed a hold of the treasure chest and he quickly drug it over. Before it sank, he drug it onto a piece of the ship that hadn't been broken up. So there he is. He's laying on top of this broken piece of hull of the ship after the kraken had destroyed the ship. The kraken had destroyed it, and all the pirates, except for Pirate Pete and his trusty friend Marty the macaw, were the only survivors. And there lay Pirate Pete. His whole ship had been turned into splinters, floating there on the ocean. And the macaw, Marty Macaw, was flying around, squawking in the air. Well, after the ship had been crushed, you know what came along?
Shark.
That's right. Pirate Pete was laying there on his piece of hull, floating there. And all he could think about was, oh, thank goodness I survived. And I still have my treasure. And then he noticed the fins of the sharks begin to circle. He knew that if he didn't act quick, he would be a treat. He'd be lunch for those mighty, mighty kings of the deep. So very carefully, he put his hands out and slowly began to paddle away so that the shark wouldn't notice him. The sharks were busy swimming around the rest of the debris from the ship, and they had been eating on his friends. And he didn't want to be eaten too, so he very carefully took and paddled away. As he paddled away, way off into the distance, he saw a little green speck. That little green speck, way off in the distance, he realized was a little spot of land. And he knew if he could get to that little spot of land, he'd be saved. So he paddled and he paddled and he paddled until he couldn't paddle anymore. And he passed out. And there he lay on his little makeshift raft, him and his chest and Marty the macaw. He laid there and he fell asleep and he woke up sunburned from the sun. And there he lay and he couldn't hardly move because of the... You ever had a bad sunburn? And you can't hardly... Oh, it was so bad. Pirate Pete was there and Marty the macaw was flying around his head. But he knew he had to make it to shore. Finally, after hours and hours of paddling out in the ocean, that little speck that he saw began to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it was an island. And finally, he came up on shore. Him and Marty the macaw and his pirate booty slid up on shore. As he slid up on shore, he noticed a ruckus going on just up the way from where he came ashore. You know what it was? It was an alligator. And the alligator was attacking somebody. And it was a girl's voice that began to holler, "Help! Help! Help! Help!" It was a damsel in distress. So Pirate Pete, even though he was sunburned and everything, reached in and got his sword, his trusty sword from inside, and he pulled it out, and he rushed over to that alligator. And he began to fight that alligator, and he saved the damsel that was in distress. But you know what? It wasn't a damsel. It was a mermaid. It was a magical mermaid. And that magical mermaid gave Pirate Pete a boon. You know what a boon is? A boon is a reward. She gave him a magical parchment and told him that once he buried his treasure, he could draw his map on that magic parchment. And that every time that somebody came to steal his treasure, even if they got the map, they would not be able to find his treasure because the magic parchment would keep them from finding it. It would make sure that nobody else could find Pirate Pete's treasure. So Pirate Pete took his treasure and he found a place just right on that island and he buried his treasure. He got rid of it and hid it, and then he took his map and he began to draw on it. He began to draw exactly where his treasure was. And then he went off and found civilization. He got off that island and he was saved, he and Marty the McCall. But many, many moons later, lots and lots of time had went by, he decided he would go back to find his treasure. So he looked at his map and he studied it very carefully to know exactly where his treasure was. Because he knew that if he looked on his map, he could see where X marks the spot. He knew that if he looked at his treasure map, he'd know exactly where it was. So he made his way back to that one and only island that he had shipwrecked on. And there he began to dig. He dug and he dug and he dug, and you know what he found? He found that his treasure was gone. The treasure chest had disappeared. And he was so mad because he knew somebody must have stolen his treasure, even though he hid it so well. And the mermaid told him that nobody'd be able to find his treasure. So he opened up his map and he looked again. And you know what he found out? There was something missing from his map. What's missing from his map? The X. There's no X there. It turned out the parchment wasn't magic parchment. It was cursed parchment. And every time you put an X on there, the X would disappear. And he began to look and he couldn't find it. So he looked and he dug and he dug and he dug. And every time he'd dig a hole, he'd look and there was nothing there. And he'd look for that treasure and he never could find his treasure chest. Every time he looked for it, he'd open his map and he would look and he'd try to find the X and there was no X. And he would look and he would look and he never could find his treasure. The more he looked, the more the treasure would be elusive. It would be hard to find. He couldn't find it anywhere. There was no place that he was able to find his treasure chest. Even if he'd look at the map, he would look and there would be no treasure. There would be no treasure that he could find every time he looked for the treasure. Have you ever lost something that you couldn't find? Yeah. If you put it in a special place, knowing that when you go back to that special place, you'd be able to find it, and then couldn't remember where that special place was? Yeah, I do that all the time. I put my keys someplace and I go, I know where they are. I put them in this very special place. I'll know where they are. But then I go looking and I can't find it. I can't, just like Pete's treasure chest. Nobody ever saw his treasure chest again. Nobody ever. I could see it. Huh? I could see it. You saw Pete's treasure chest? Yeah. No way. He looked everywhere. I mean, the map was cursed. He couldn't find the X. There was no place for him to see it. It was totally gone.
I see it.
You seen the treasure? No, the treasure's not there.
I see.
There's no X there. No. We can all go on adventures, and we can all look for the treasure. And we can search, and we can search, and we can search. Everywhere we look, we can look, and we cannot find it. But lots of times, it's right there. It's right there in front of our faces, but we can't find it. I have never been able to find Pirate Pete's treasure, and I have looked everywhere for Pirate Pete's treasure. What? You found it? Where did you find it?
It was on your back.
It was on my back the whole time? Oh my goodness. The Bible tells us that there are thieves, and there are pirates, and there are people that want to steal the things we have. The treasures that we have. The Bible puts it this way. Jesus said, store up for yourselves treasure You want treasure?
Yes.
Yeah. Everybody wants treasure. We would always love to go on a treasure hunt. The Bible says, store up for yourselves treasure, but not here on earth. The Bible says, don't store your treasure here on earth because pirates will come, thieves will come and steal it. It says that moths will come and eat your precious garments. Moths. Have you ever put some clothes in the closet and come back and find little holes in them?
Yeah.
Where the moths have eaten them? Jesus said, don't do that. He said, instead, store your treasure in heaven. Now, how do I store my treasure in heaven? Can I put it in a big box and throw it up in the air? No, that doesn't work. You see, Jesus said, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. What he means is, if you love the things of God, and you love Jesus, and you put him first, then that's where your treasure is. And because you love him, your heart will be there where your treasure is. Pirate Pete put his trust in treasures of this world. But God says, put your treasure in him. He should be our treasure.